Kia ora everyone, welcome to this very relaxing point and trace video where I will be talking to you about the journey of Captain James Cook. I will be showing you 2 or 3 maps and some pictures from the library book, and I will be talking to you about his discoveries and about the travels that he's done, the cartography, the surveying job, and also about how his life ended. So let's begin. So first of all, if you don't know, James Cook was a famous man and brave captain who put on a map several continents that were not there, and he was trying to search for Terra Australis. Was supposed to be somewhere here. That's what the scientists thought. And his journeys were done in 1760s and around about that time. He's done 3 main journeys and we'll look into them. But why I wanted to show you this map first, so you can have an understanding of how the map looked like before Cook started his discovery. As you can see on this map, we can clearly see the borders of Eurasia and Africa. We see quite a lot of distinct landmarks that we can recognize nowadays. We have here all the way through a very detailed drawing of those coastlines, and of course the Asia, India, and we have a really good drawing of South America and most part of North America from this eastern side. But what is missing on this map is, of course, our Antarctica. Scientists assume that it should be there to balance out their North Pole land mass. That's what they thought, the land mass. There's quite a lot of land mass in here, and to balance it out, they thought there should be a big chunk of land in this area too. Before Cook started his journey, there was this part of Australia already known, and this part of New Zealand here. In about 100 years before Cook, Abel Tasman visited New Zealand very briefly, and he put that island on the map. I wanted to show you a picture of Captain James Cook from the book that I took from the library, and I thought it's really good to have an actual drawings to show you, because during his voyages Captain Cook had, well, he actually became captain only in the 3rd voyage. Before that he was not a captain. However, he had scientists that were biologists and astronomers in his crew. And that means that some of them were artists as well. Some of them were depicting events that were happening during this time, and others were painting and drawing the plants and animals that they found. So this is an actual portrait of Captain James Cook. So this is a photograph of a portrait that is stored in the National Portrait Gallery in London. Maybe some of you have seen it. So James Cook was born on in October 1728, and oh yes, look at this. James Cook was born in 1728 at Marton in Yorkshire, on the side of present-day Middlesbrough. And we have a lot of description of his family that I don't want to share, but what I wanted to tell you is that his voyages created this need for more exploration, and those scientists who traveled with him, they brought so much knowledge back to England that it was since then a normal practice to have biologists or scientists on the boats that were traveling around the world. And this is how, for example, Darwin got his place in the Beagle. This is a picture again of an artist who traveled with James Cook on a hut, and that is depicting of how Polynesian lived back then, which is very similar to how Maori here in New Zealand had their huts too. Just briefly, let's have a look now, and we will come back to this book later as well, but let's have a look at the map of his voyages. And here we have a New World map. You can see the 3 periods of time and 3 voyages that Cook has done. He was a great navigator and a cartographer and a surveyor, and that's why he was brought into the team that travel for the first time in the Endeavour in 1768, and this journey took them almost 3 years to go almost across the world and go into New Zealand and Australia and put those missing pieces on the map. But when he started his journey here in England, his task was actually an astronomical task. So what he was supposed to do is he was supposed to go closer to Tahiti, and he was supposed to observe here in Tahiti an astronomical event when Venus crosses the sun disk. He was supposed to take exact time of 4 phases of this crossing, and this was needed for the scientific society back then to calculate the dimensions or the size of their solar system. Back then, in 1768, scientists were trying to understand what is the distance from the Sun to the Earth. Before James Cook, of course, there were other scientists who discovered different ways of calculating that distance. The scientists Halley, and I may not pronounce his name right, he discovered that using a parallax, the special angle that you observe from different locations one object, and you note the angle, and by knowing the angles you are able to calculate the distance to that object. And this is why then later Kepler as well, I think, had the formula to calculate the distances between the Earth and the Earth and the Sun and other planets. And so, yeah, that's why later on they needed those calculations, they needed those locations and angles and the exact time of the event happening. So here, Cook successfully set up some telescopes with his mates, and they observed successfully how Venus crossing the sun disk, and they specifically recorded the time. So they thought something was wrong because the time that they recorded, there were several people who recorded the time, and the time measurements were different, so that it varied between the observants. But they sent those observations anyway, and a scientist, French scientist, based on Cook's observations, he calculated the distance from the Earth to the Sun. And based on those calculations, he was pretty sure that the distance is 153 million kilometers. This is what he calculated, and he was almost correct. Later on, with more modern equipment, it was calculated that the distance was 149 million kilometers, so he was almost exact in his calculations, even though Cook thought there was something wrong with the time measurements. So successfully completing this, he received a different order to go and search Terra Australis. And of course, Terra Australis is not Australia. It's Australis means the southern. So they were looking for the land that is the most southern land. And they traveled through here, and this voyage they observed, they circumnavigated New Zealand. And you know why I'm talking about James Cook? Because most of the time in New Zealand you see his name more than any other name, because many things are associated with James Cook, different monuments, and there is a Mount Cook, there is a Cook Strait, and there are different other landmarks that are named after Cook, because he was the first man who put New Zealand on the map. And of course, this side of Australia too, so that the entire Western Australia was unknown, but James Cook has done it. Let's look at the map of New Zealand and how James presented it. In my book, I have it. It's a very interesting thing to see because, of course, I have few bookmarks here that we will find. Of course, during his travel, he met Maori, and those encounters were not necessarily pleasant for both Maori and his team, but this was in New Zealand, at the first map of New Zealand. This dotted line, I'm not sure whether you can see it, but there is a dotted line that shows the travel of the Endeavour, and it took James Cook 6 months actually to travel all across New Zealand and put all those landmarks on the map. This map has 3 major mistakes that many of you will be able to see, but if you don't know the map of New Zealand, you probably won't know. But here, James Cook put this land mass as an island. However, it's a peninsula, and here we have Christchurch, and this is Banks Peninsula. So James Cook probably had low visibility when he was crossing that part and thought that there is a big channel in between. The second mistake that he made was in here. Here he identified this part as a peninsula, but that is actually Stewart Island. This is the 3rd island in the row that you see on every map, and there is a channel here. The other mistake is with the name of the islands. This name was put down more or less correctly because the South Island is called Te Waiponamu, so we can see some similarities in how it is written. But here we have a completely unknown name of this North Island, and no one knows why he named it like this, but we know that he put a Maori name of this island here, although it turned out that it was never called like this, because the North Island in Maori is called Te Ika a Maui. However, we don't really know why he was told it was called this. Here, the first map of New Zealand, but also let's have a look at the picture, the painting of this beautiful man here. When the crew arrived to New Zealand, and also to other Pacific islands, they noticed that most people had some sort of tattoos on their skin, but Maori tattoos were different because they were carved into the skin. So those types of tattoo, they produce very deep scars, and they create this relief. So it's not smooth as you can feel other tattoos, but this is actually a relief that can be felt when you touch it. And of course it looks different. There's special instruments that they used, and since then the crew members also tattooed themselves because they quite liked it. And after that they brought this habit in England, and many other sailors had this kind of a mark and did tattoos on their skins. And many of you probably know that the word tattoo comes from the Pacific Islands as well. This is how some of those Pacific Islands called this type of tattoo. In Maori language, for example, it's called differently. It's called toimoko. But in some other languages, it's quite similar to the word tattoo. By the way, there is another word that came to us from the Pacifics, which is taboo. So something that is forbidden. And I know that even in Russian language, because this is my mother tongue, we have this word taboo. But I never knew that it came from the Pacific Islands. I was quite surprised to know that in Maori, this word is tapu. So it's quite similar because all the Pacific languages are related and some words sound similar. Alright, so here we are. We will have a quick look into his other two journeys. Next time he traveled on a Resolution, and again he traveled from England. This time he went this way, and then he went. You see how close he came to Antarctica, but he never found it. So when he came here, it was about 100 kilometers away only. And here they discovered a problem. They didn't have drinking water, and they had this experiment. They decided to melt some icebergs, and when they did, they discovered that if you melt an iceberg that is floating in the salt water, you can get fresh water. And that's how they overcame that problem. In that book we have a really nice picture of that. So here in this picture you can see the Resolution boat, and the men are catching the iceberg and they are pulling it onto the boat to melt it to create some drinking water. This is for the first time when James Cook observed that the water can be liquid even below the freezing temperature, and that salt water has a different point of freezing than fresh water. unfortunately, he didn't discover the land, and he traveled through New Zealand again, and there were some interesting pathways here that I can't navigate myself how it was, but at the end he came back home like so. And his third journey, that was his last, and that's why in the purple we have going here, coming back through here, going again through the Cook Strait in New Zealand, going through Tahiti, going this way because he needed to discover some northern passage that he couldn't find as well. And then here his journey stopped on the islands of Hawaii. And you know that recently I've been to Hawaii, and I've been to the place where Captain Cook was killed. I will quickly show you. And those of you who went to Hawaii probably know about this. So you remember from my last video that the chain of Hawaiian islands are finishing with this big island, and it is the youngest, the biggest island in the chain. It has some volcanic activities going on here. And the Captain Cook was killed here in Kealakekua Bay. This is a place where you can't drive to, you have to walk there. So if you look closer, you can see here the bay, and this is a magnificent place, so beautiful, and especially the underwater world, of course. If you are going to Hawaii, this is a must. You can't just skip this because it's probably one of the best snorkeling sites in Hawaii, and this is by far the best I've ever seen, and so accessible as well. Of course, if you are physically fit, you can access it easily, but if not, you can just take a boat that will take you here. They will stop here and you will snorkel everywhere as well. Captain Cook left the bay. They discovered some fault in the mechanics of the boat. They had to come back. The relationship between the local Hawaiians and the crew were already tense, and it didn't go down well because one of the locals stole his rowboat, and Captain Cook was already very tired and he got quite angry, so he abducted or kidnapped the chief, and then he wanted to take the chief on board, demanded the return of the boat, and as I said, the tension was there already. There were few native Hawaiians killed, because imagine that native people, of course, were only armed with stones and wooden weapon, but Captain Cook and his team had firearm. Of course, they had an advantage in everything, in every battle. So there were few people fell here from the native side, and then they didn't let it go. So the Captain Cook was killed here, and this was the end of his journey, unfortunately. his body was taken by the crew after some negotiation and was buried at sea. But as I said, now here you have a Cook monument that is like a concrete stela, that concrete or metal, I don't remember, to be honest, but it doesn't really matter because this place is gorgeous, is so beautiful, and if you're lucky you can take a boat and sail to this place, just snorkel around and see all that beauty by yourself. Of course, there are a few controversy over his death because it was so long ago, and the native Hawaiians, they don't have the written record of the events that happened, and the English side of this event, they had some written records, but it's obviously one-sided. There were a few different journals, some of them have mismatches, but I don't really know what they were. It doesn't really matter these days because we know that the native population was not treated fairly anyway. However, at this stage, we don't know exactly what happened at that time. And so after the Captain Cook was killed, there was a different captain who took charge of that boat, and from my understanding they went somewhere to here, and they sent a message about the death of the captain by the land mail. And I think by the time the ship arrived, this message almost got there, so there wasn't really a big difference. Captain Cook had a wife. They didn't really live together that much because he was traveling since he was 39 or 38, and he was at sea most of the time. They had 6 children. Unfortunately, none of them survived. However, Captain Cook left so many other things after him, especially, as I said, in New Zealand, and we know that in Australia as well. And he is remembered by his discoveries, and he was a brave man who led the team and did whatever was required of him, and even more. The world discovery is, of course, something magical when you think about it, but when you are in the boat, when you are at sea and conquering the waves, the cold, the sickness, it's not really romantic as it could sound. It's quite brutal, actually. But those men did it, and now we can learn from that experience and become better people ourselves, hopefully. So here you go, everyone. This is the travels of Captain Cook, and I hope that was tingly enough for you, and I hope that now you can have a really good sleep. Have a good night, everyone.